The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, Part 2. So, Chapter 9. It is the day after Dorian Gray heard the news about Sybil Vane from Lord Henry and had gone to the opera. And so Basil Hallward obviously comes to see his friend and pay him a visit. He looked for him at the club and a couple of other places. And then he said, he didn't think that Dorian would be there at any of those places because he would obviously be grieving about Sybil Vane. And he really tries to be a good friend and an understanding friend and saying, it's terrible and I'm so sorry about it and you must be feeling terrible. And Dorian Gray is very indifferent about the whole thing. And he says to Basil, really, don't worry about it. I'm over it. It's something in the past. And Basil says, what do you mean in the past? It happened yesterday. And I thought of going to the family, but I didn't really know them and I didn't want to be awkward and whatever. But I mean, surely you must have said something or went there or whatever the case is. And Dorian's like, no, what happened, and Basil can't understand because Dorian Gray was so enamored with Sybil Vane, and now a day later after a terrible performance and news of her death, he feels absolutely nothing. And he's even more shocked and appalled by the fact that Dorian Gray, that very same day about hearing the news, went that evening to the opera with Lord Henry. To him, it doesn't make sense. If you really, really love the person, why is it not having an effect on you? Why are you not bothered about this? So anyway, Dorian Gray reacts and he says, you don't know the suffering that I've been through. You don't know what I've gone through. Don't talk to me about this again. It's done, it's done. And Basil says, fine, all right, I understand. But I see the portrait is covered. Why have you covered it? And Dorian says something about the sun or whatever, and Basil says, no, man, nonsense. I varnished it. It's got my own frame on it. It's cured. It's fine. I mean, the sun's not going to affect it. And he actually gets up to remove the cloth in order to look. And Dorian says, no, don't. And again, Basil is a little bit thrown off by this. This doesn't really make sense to him because it's his portrait. He painted it. It's of Dorian Gray. So again, there's all these things that are just not making sense to Basil. But Dorian, in order to kind of sidestep things, and he remembers once that Lord Henry said to him that if he wants a interesting half an hour, he should ask Basil why he doesn't want to showcase the portrait. And here, Dorian Gray is purposefully mean and purposefully insensitive towards Basil Hallward. And kind of with a bit of a sneer or a smirk, he says to Basil, listen, why didn't you want to show my portrait? It was your best work and you were so wonderfully happy about it and, Lord Henry raved about it and it's a perfect likeness of me. Why didn't you want to show it? And eventually he gets Basil to reveal it. And Basil says, have you noticed anything about the portrait? And in Dorian's mind, he's thinking, oh no, he knows. Because he's thinking of the cruelty that you can see in the picture. And now he's wondering, does Basil realize what is going on? While Basil was painting it, did Basil maybe realize that something was different about this particular portrait? So he's wondering, does Basil know my secret? But Basil is asking from the point of view of his adoration, his love, his idolatry for Dorian Gray. So in a very, very vulnerable moment, Basil Hallward explains to Dorian, I didn't really want people to see the portrait because I felt like they would judge me. I felt like they would look at me, learn something about my life, make assumptions, and that they would judge me for it. So Basil in particular is very, very hesitant and very, very scared about the portrait that he drew of Dorian Gray, because it can come across as homosexual, which obviously at the time was punishable by law and death. And it would, be a big scandal, and, he would lose his patrons and lose his money and lose his social standing, but he could also lose his life for it. So it was a real concern for him. And Dorian is very flippant, very nonchalant, very indifferent about it. And he kind of, says, oh, what does it matter? No, I just was wondering because, Lord Henry mentioned something. And Basil kind of goes away with the feeling that, this is now very, very wrong, and Dorian has changed, and it's all Lord Henry's fault. And he seems to never really see the two of them, very often. So Dorian Gray then makes the decision that the portrait needs to be locked away. He's now starting to get a little bit paranoid. He thinks that maybe his butler has had a peep at it or is maybe curious about it. It is a room that his friends and other people have access to. And he never wants there to be a point where he's not in the room and one of them actually looks at the portrait. Okay, because now he's realized that the wish he made has come true. So he's actually joined the dots, he's put two and two together, and he realizes that something has happened here. Okay, so chapter 10. He gets a hold of the picture framers that he usually uses, and the owner himself comes to help Dorian Gray. And again, that's noteworthy because people go out of their way for Dorian Gray. They wouldn't do it for anybody else, but they do it for him. Again, that youth, that look of innocence, that charm. And he's got this purple cloth covering it. Now, the significance of that is that purple cloth that he's using to cover the portrait is actually a type of a relic, type of an heirloom. It's a shroud. That purple cloth, its intended use was to actually cover a dead body. So think about that, keep that in the back of your mind, because if this portrait is going to showcase all the wrong, all the evil, all the sins of Dorian Gray, if the portrait is dying but Dorian Gray is remaining young and beautiful, then in a sense the portrait is the dead body. It's what Dorian Gray should be. So the fact that he's now covered it with this purple cloth that was intended as a shroud for a dead body, that is quite significant. So the man carries the painting up, the portrait. Now, of course, this is obviously a life-size portrait of a person standing or sitting. And it's big and it's heavy and it's got layers of paint on it and it's got a big wooden picture frame on it. And this is now going right to the top of the tower, the schoolroom that Dorian Gray used to live in, stay in, learn in, sleep in, play in, read in, covered in dust, hasn't been used since the last time Dorian Gray was a student. The fact that his, grandfather was looking after him. So it is going to the schoolroom. So portrait gets carried up there. It gets left there. There's an old fireplace. Everything's covered in dust. There's a chair. There's a table. There's a bookcase. There's a window. And the man leaves and Dorian Gray locks it up. When he gets back down, he sees a newspaper article about the details of Sybil's inquisition, So he just kind of has a look at it, folds it up, and, has nothing more to do with it. There's a letter from Lord Henry, as well as a yellow covered book. So essentially, Dorian Gray, I've had him with his yellow golden locks, but I've also done a dotted outline of a yellow book, because it comes to embody him, influence him, be a part of him. He draws heavily from it. It's a really, really significant novel for him. And that's why this point onward, now that he actually has the yellow book, the little symbol that I have next to Dorian Gray's color has now solid lines, because now he actually has the book. And he starts reading it, and he is so taken with this story and drawn in, and he sees himself in this character, that hours go by. And even Lord Henry points out to Dorian, listen, you're actually kind of late. So for him to be saying that is actually quite something. And Dorian Gray's like, I'm sorry, like, I apologize, but it's this book that you sent me. And then Lord Henry says, oh, so you like it? And Dorian says, I never said I liked it. I said I'm fascinated by it. There's a difference. And Lord Henry, right at the end of the chapter, seems to say that this is quite important. This is an important distinction for Dorian to make, that you can have likes and dislikes, but they are not the same as things that you are repulsed by or fascinated by. So this seems to be the final part of the transition for Dorian Gray. Never knew about his youth and beauty, then was made aware of it. Didn't know the effect that he had on people, now he's aware of it. Was making choices in order to go with the person that was the most entertaining, controversial, and fun person. Didn't want to go with boring, reserved, conservative Basil. And now he's read this book and he sees himself in it, and this transition has happened where he now distances himself from anything or anyone that he engages with. And that is very, very important. Now, in chapter 11, 18 years pass. So this is like those training montages that you see in films, or if you think of, somebody growing up, there's a lot of different images. You see the process like in about a minute. There's a song playing in the background. It's a montage. Okay, so 18 years have passed, and that's quite significant, because generally you come of age at 18. It is seen as your childhood is over. But for Dorian Gray, this is like his second childhood. So he had his first one, then he met Lord Henry. Lord Henry, influenced him and made an impression on him and opened his eyes to things. And because he's not aging, he's got another 18 years of youth and beauty. And what I've drawn here is a whole manner of things. Because basically what Dorian Gray does is he spends all his time getting things, buying things, looking at things, admiring things, looking at people, getting people, engaging people, having numerous multiple affairs with both men and women. He engages in any kind of alcohol, any kind of drug, any kind of smoking. He pursues music, he pursues singers, artists. Basically, he fills his life for the next 18 years with pure indulgence. What he wants, when he wants, how he wants it, with who he wants it, he does, and pays no attention to the consequences. And it's easy for him because the consequences are on the portrait. And he actually takes quite a great pleasure in looking at how the portrait changes, looking how each and every single sin he does, every single temptation that he gives into, every single life that he negatively affects, he likes to see it, he likes to witness it. It does become a sense of paranoia for him. After a certain amount of time, he doesn't like to be away from home for very long periods. He always keeps the door to the schoolroom on his person at all times. He doesn't stay far away from home for extended periods of time. Eventually, he stops looking at the portrait. He keeps it covered. He's not interested. He doesn't want to look at it. It does become a sense of paranoia. So in the beginning, he said, no, it's going to be my conscience because I'm going to be good. Then he's like, no, I want to see it. I want to see it change. I'm going to really enjoy looking at this and living my life and seeing everything on the portrait. Now he can't bear to see it. So on his 38th birthday, in chapter 12, it's very, very late at night, approaching morning, and he's on his way home. He sees Basil Hallward running in the street, and he chooses to ignore him. But Basil turns around, recognizes Dorian by the coat that he's wearing, goes up to him, says, listen, I just wanted to come and see you. I'm actually leaving for Paris, by the night train. But I just needed to really, really talk to you, so can I come in for a minute? So Dorian lets him in, they're having the conversation, and Basil calls Dorian to task. And he says, I look at you, and I know what you were like before you stopped visiting with me. But I can't let go of the fact that your name has come up in each and every single conversation where either somebody's life has been ruined, somebody is seen in a dodgy part of town, a woman, has been implicated in terrible things, people have been used, people have been manipulated, there are people that will no longer go anywhere where you are at, there are rumors of scandals, scandalous rumors, and I just had to come and see you because I don't think it's right. I know you, I see you, I want you to regain what you lost. I'm here as your friend. You really, really need to change. This cannot go on. And Dorian's response is, well, what do I care? You tell me all about these other people, but you know nothing about them. You don't know what I know. Am I really to blame if somebody goes and does some terrible action? Now I'm implicated just because I was seen with them? No. And then Basil says, well, I suppose to really know the truth, I would have to see your soul, and only God can do that. And then Dorian says, oh, you know what? Let me show you my soul. And of course, Basil is horrified by this, okay? He thinks it's complete and utter blasphemy. And Dorian says, no, you painted the portrait. Essentially, he's blaming Basil for what has happened to him. He believes that Basil should see this. And he says to Basil, I will show you my soul. It's not a long read. You can look at everything there. It won't take a moment of your time. And Basil says, fine. So he takes him up to the schoolroom, he takes the cover off, and Basil is beside himself. He doesn't know what to do. He doesn't think it's his. He keeps umming and ahhing like it's making him feel ill. He can't take it. He doesn't know what's happening. He's looking at the portrait. He's looking at Dorian Gray. He can see that his name is signed in the corner. He can see bits and pieces, of the original painting. He doesn't know how it happened, and he can't understand this. And he says to Dorian, but this is terrible. I mean, then you must be really, really suffering, And Dorian says, yeah, you don't know what I've been through, etc., up, down, left, right, all the rest of it. And then Basil says, no, but you must pray. Because if you prayed and you made a wish, surely if you pray and make a wish again, it will be removed. We can fix this. He mentions parts of the Lord's Prayer, the Our Father, forgive us our trespasses. And while he's sitting there at the table, he had to sit down and he's got his head in his hands and it's just too much for him. He's very overwhelmed. Dorian is filled with inexplicable hatred. It's almost like he's looking at Basil and he's looking at the portrait and he hates Basil for it. Okay, inexplicable hatred. Okay, he blames everything on this man. Okay, this man is the one who did it. He's the one who painted it. He's the one who made me vain. He's the one who made me like this. And he actually stabs him multiple times in the neck with one of the palette knives. And there's another knife that he had up there that he used in order to cut some cord or string or whatever it is, and he stabs him again and again and again and again. And now he's got a bit of a problem. So he panics for a moment because now he's got a dead body upstairs, and he talks about the body as a body and the thing and the man, and he won't call him by name, okay, distancing himself again. This is just an object, it's now just dead. And so what he does is he goes downstairs, he puts on his coat and everything again, he goes outside, he rings the bell, waits for the butler, asks the butler what the time is, says, sorry that I've missed my key. And the butler says, no, it was just Basil Hallward who was here. He was looking for you. He says, I'm sorry that I missed him. Please wake me up at this time tomorrow. And he goes in and he hides Basil's bag and coat in a secret compartment in the library. And he then goes to bed. And strangely enough, he has a wonderful sleep. No nightmares, no weird dreams, nothing like that. Sleeps the night away. Okay? Then in chapter 14, he knows that he must get this man by the name of Alan Campbell. And he has a moment of sort of existential terror while he's waiting for this man to come. Because he sends a note with the butler to go and fetch Alan Campbell. And obviously you can't put a lot of details, but now he's worrying. What if he's gone? What if he won't come? What if he's left the country? Now this body's sitting up there. But eventually Alan Campbell comes. And to cut a long story short, he blackmails Alan Campbell into getting rid of the body. And Alan Campbell eventually leaves quite late at night. So it's taken him, almost 7-8 hours in order to get rid of the body. But again, Dorian Gray blackmailed someone. This is another person that he used to have a really, really good friendship with. Something happened and Alan Campbell would have nothing more to do with him. So that is chapter 14. In chapter 15, it's another one of those parties thrown by the aristocracy and the elite and the upper class. And Dorian is there and Lord Henry is there, and they're busy having this conversation, and Lord Henry's making all these controversial statements. And then he says to Dorian, like, you're very off form, you're not like yourself, what's happening, you left the club quite early, what did you do when you got home? And he's just making small talk, and Dorian is very defensive, and he's like, why? Why does it matter where I went? Ask my butler, if you don't believe me. And Lord Henry's like, well, I couldn't care less what you did. I'm just making small talk. But eventually Dorian gets to sort of blow it off, and he promises Lord Henry that he will see him at 11 o'clock lunch the next day. When Dorian gets home, he experiences withdrawal symptoms. So he's looking at this wonderful cabinet that he's got in one of his rooms. And in a drawer, in a secret compartment, in a secret box, in a secret thing, there is this green pungent ointment, like a sticky sort of cream or balm or something like that. But it's very, very like heavily scented. It's pungent. It's a smell and a half. And he's got the tremors, he's got the shakes. It's basically a drug withdrawal. Okay, it's opium. So he puts on his disguise, he goes out the back door, he finds a carriage, in a very, very different street to his own, and pays a fortune to get this man to drive as fast as he possibly can, okay, urging the horses on, because remember, no cars. It's all horse-drawn carriages. And at the beginning of chapter 16, he actually goes to an opium den. So this is now at the docks. So this is very, very far away from like central London or any place like that. Dodgy, shady, brothels, prostitutes, drunkards, drug abuse, you name it, it's there. But when he goes inside, one of the men that Basil mentioned, Adrian Singleton, he meets Adrian at this place. And Adrian really couldn't care less about anything. He says, as long as you've got this stuff, you don't really want anything else. But the sight of Adrian, especially after the talking to that he got from Basil, is playing on his mind, okay, is weighing very heavily on his mind. And he can't actually bring himself to stay and get his fix at that particular den. And while he's leaving, one of the prostitutes there and drug abusers says, yeah, there goes the devil's bargain. And he tells her to shut up and don't call me that. And she's like, yeah, you like to be called Prince Charming. But Dorian tells her to shut up again and he leaves. He's now going to go to another place to get his fix. Now, while he's lost in thought, somebody grabs him and shoves him in an alley and puts a gun to his head and says, I am James Vane. You killed my sister Sybil. You harmed her, you wronged her, and I swore that if I ever found you again, I would kill you. So say your prayers, this is your last. And Dorian's like, no, but it wasn't me, you got the wrong man. And James is like, no, I'm going to kill you. And he's got him by the throat and he's got the gun. And then Dorian says, no, you've got the wrong man. How old is the person that you are looking for? And James says 40 years old. So Dorian says, look at me in the light. And when James Vane drags Dorian into the light of the lamppost, he lets him go and says, I'm really sorry, I got the wrong person, because in his mind, he's looking for somebody, according to all the rumors and scandals, who is 40 years old. Dorian Gray looks like he's 21. Okay, so after 18 years, he has not changed one bit. Still got the beautiful eyes, the lovely complexion, the golden locks of hair. And Dorian's like, yeah, you see, you need to think next time. Don't just pull your gun on people, have your facts straight. And he walks calmly away. And one of the prostitutes from the den comes up to James Vane and says, you're an idiot. That was the one you were looking for. And James says, how do you know? And she says, it was 18 years ago that he made me what I am today. He made a bargain with the devil, and he never ages. He's always youthful. And by that time, it's already too late. Dorian Gray has disappeared. Chapter 17. Dorian Gray has a whole host of people over at his country home, Selby Royal. And he's got a whole group of people, and the Duchess, one of the Duchesses, is there, and she's pouring the tea, and Lord Henry's there, and other people are going to go out shooting the next day, and more people are coming the day after. And again, this is one of the places that Basil spoke about. He says, look at the people that you have there, look at the things that you do there. But these people seem to be a bit more of the socially acceptable guests. So while Lord Henry and the Duchess are busy having a conversation, they hear this groan and this thud, and they run into the room, and there Dorian Gray is passed out on the floor. When he wakes up, he's lying on a couch, and Lord Henry says, listen, what's going on here? Like, you gave the Duchess a scare, like, what's happening? You're not well. And Dorian's like, no, don't worry about me. I just fainted. There might be too much going on, but I'm just going to stay in my room to make sure. What he doesn't tell Lord Henry is that the reason he fainted and cried out is because he thought he saw James Vane looking at him from outside the window. And that is now playing on his mind. And for 3 days, he doesn't leave his room because now he's terrified. James Vane has figured out who he is. He knows where he lives. He's looking for him. He's going to kill him. James Vane is the only one who is any real threat to Dorian Gray. In chapter 18, Dorian Gray eventually says, you know what, I've got to get out. And he goes walking with Lord Henry. And they're looking at the men who are shooting, the quails and the pheasants. And this beautiful hare, it's a wild rabbit, very, very different. Okay, it's not a cute bunny. Okay, they look at you like they know things about you. So this beautiful hare pops out, and Dorian's like, no, don't shoot it, it's beautiful. And the man that he's with, Sir Gregory, says, what are you talking about? And he shoots the rabbit. But in addition to the cry of the rabbit, there is also a cry of a man. And they find this man whose chest has been shot open, because obviously they're using shotguns, and he's dead. And they make their way up to the house again. The shooting has stopped for now. And while Dorian Gray is sitting in his study, because he's basically writing a letter, to tell Lord Henry, you carry on with the guests. I'm going to go home. I'm going to see your doctor. I'm not feeling well. The head groundskeeper walks in and says, listen, we don't know what to do about this man. Oh, is he not one of ours? No. And now there's another thought in Dorian's mind. So he goes immediately to the farmhouse where this body is being kept in a barn. Yeah. And when the thing is removed from the man's face, he sees that it's James Vane. So James Vane accidentally got shot and killed, and now Dorian is relieved because the single solitary person who posed a threat to him is dead. Okay, so chapter 19. Lord Henry's visiting Dorian Gray again. And Dorian says, no, I've been out of town. You haven't seen me for a couple of weeks. I've been in the countryside, and I've decided that I'm going to be good. And Lord Henry says, well, anybody can be good in the countryside. There's no temptation. There's nothing to give into. Everybody leads these very terribly boring lives. They're uncivilized. They're uncultured. And how are you exactly going to be good? So Dorian says, no, I met this wonderfully beautiful young girl there. And I decided that I wasn't going to put her through a terrible ordeal. So before anything got too far or even started, I left. And Lord Henry's like, really? That's your attempt at being good? You've basically just shown this woman something that she could have had, something that was attainable, and then you ripped it from her. Do you really think that this common, beautiful farm girl is ever going to look at anybody else the same way that she looked at you? Nobody else can offer to her what you were going to offer to her. So she's never going to be happy. She's going to be completely miserable. She's never going to have a happy marriage because she's going to keep thinking of you. And by the way, you say that you left her and she was in good health and all the rest of it. How do you know that she's not doing Ophelia and floating, face downward in the river somewhere? And Dorian says, no, you're terribly mean. You're upsetting me. Don't talk about it. I said that I'm trying to be good. As far as I know, she's still fine. She's still alive. She'll get over it. She'll forget me. It's a start and I can be better. But then he thinks about it afterwards and he thinks, you know what? Maybe I did what I did not for good reasons. Maybe I did it because I felt bad. And in chapter 20, when he comes home, he's thinking about everything that Lord Henry said, and he's thinking about what happened, and he's thinking about Hetty, this farm girl that he left before he could corrupt her, and she reminds him a lot of Sybil Vane, and basically he's having a good hard think about everything that he's done. And now he's wondering, is he actually capable of doing anything good? Can he do anything without a selfish reason behind it? And so he decides, no, I'm going to go look at the portrait. I want to see if anything's changed. And when he goes to look at the portrait, it's actually gotten worse. And he realizes that what he did wasn't good. It was selfish. He did it with vain intent. He wanted to have a hand at trying something that was a new sensation, a new experience, and he was just going to go for it. Not because he actually wanted to truly change. And he's looking at the portrait, and he's looking at the knife that he used to murder Basil Hallward, and he says, this is the problem. It's the portrait. If I get rid of the portrait, then I won't have this problem. I won't have the paranoia. I won't have this constant reminder. I can be young and innocent again. And, I can just carry on with life. And at that point, there are people walking outside and they hear this terrible cry from the house. And they ask the policeman to go and investigate. The policeman knocks on the door. There's no answer. So he goes back and he's standing and he's keeping watch. And the men ask the policeman, whose house is that? And he says, Mr. Dorian Gray. And one of the men smirks, and the two of them, give a sly smile to each other. And they carry on walking. One of those men was the father of a man that Dorian Gray had corrupted, and he now feels that justice has been served. The servants can't get in by the door, so they have to get onto the roof, and they have to get onto the balcony, and they have to come in by the window. And they don't even recognize the man on the floor. Can't recognize him at all. They're looking at the portrait, and the portrait looks like their young and youthful and innocent looking master, but the man on the ground is a completely different story. And there's a knife in his chest, and there's blood on the floor, and they can only recognize him by his rings on his fingers. Okay, so normally we would leave it there, okay? A good story, thing at the end, we leave it there, but I'm just going to spell it out for people because you are going to be tested and examined on this. Dorian Gray stabbed the portrait. The portrait had his soul. So essentially, Dorian Gray killed himself because he killed the thing that was taking on absolutely each and every single sin, act, word, deed, thought that Dorian had that was wrong, that was sinful. Okay? The picture was actually more alive than Dorian Gray was. So by Dorian Gray stabbing the picture, he was actually killing himself. Then, very long video, I know, but I'm just going to go over the 4 blocks that I have. These are the 4 major concepts in the novel. So any notes that you might have on aestheticism, you need to go over those. The idea that beauty and art are valuable for their own sake. So you don't read anything into it. You don't need an explanation. Somebody drew a picture. It's a pretty picture. That's all it needs to be. So who are the aesthetes who have this idea in the novel that beauty and art is valuable and that the artist shouldn't be revealed in it? Where do we see this take place? How does it work? What do people believe about it? Why do the characters have this idea and this view? Please don't forget, there is a preface to the novel. That is important too. Everybody studies the 20 chapters, but they always forget the preface, the epigrams and the statements that are made in the preface. Those are important because they play out in the novel. Hedonism. Who is a hedonist? Why are they a hedonist? Where do we see acts of hedonism? What are hedonistic behaviors? How? Okay, this pursuit of pleasure above all else. The Faustian bargain, selling your soul in exchange for, and then you fill in the blank. Who sells their soul? Why do they sell their soul? What do they get for selling their soul? Art and morality. Lord Henry says that you can have a badly written book and you can have a well-written book, but you can't read a book and say it's bad. You can't read a book and say it's good. So this concept of art being bad, good, not bad, not good, the portrayal of good and evil. So where, how, who, what, when. Thank you, Ting Ting, for passing through my page. Have a seat. Okay, so those are very, very important concepts, and those need to be covered. It will come up in your essays and in your contextual questions. If you have any questions, feel more than welcome to ask them and write them down in the comments section. And please also look at my other videos where I go over the metric poems, and I also go over Othello, and I've got a character map for that as well. Thank you.